Ah,
Flawless
what's
Instagram
up?
live
You like
start.
that? I passed the first test.
Um,
Got any more brain busters?
sure, yeah, at the end. I got some questions, some theory questions for you.
Okay,
Um, hey, happy Cinco de Mayo.
that's right.
Cheers. You get my one cheers of the day. I only allow one.
Is that like the Royal Cup?
No, it's different. One cheers of the day. I think there's too much cheersing. I've got like a Zoom happy hour thing later, and I'm gonna have to tell them, sorry, I already did my one cheers
Yeah.
for the day, because I just like to get right into my drink. Really, all the
Yeah.
cheersing is just too much.
Too much bullshit. Yeah.
So yeah, happy Cinco de Mayo. What do you got there?
This is a Pilsner Urquell. Poured into my pickle jar.
You're not really Cinco de Mayoing it up.
Why not? Why am I supposed to drink a adjunct lager that's made like a German beer in Mexico?
Probably made in like Missouri.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just drink Pilsner Urquell, the best fucking beer ever.
It's a fine beer.
It's a fine beer. It's a fine beer.
I did go with the mezcal margarita in a Remy Martin glass.
Ooh, classy. So how do we do this? Do you want like my early life in the first hour?
I made an outline.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a good idea. We can start with that. I do want to get into that. All right, so my God, you've been working in this industry for way longer than I've even known you.
That's correct.
First job is stocking shelves at a wine and liquor store. Which one was that, and how old were you?
Merchants Fine Wine in Grosse Pointe, Michigan.
Okay, where we are both from.
Yeah, a little backstory. Paul and I are from the same town, Grosse Pointe, Michigan, outside of Detroit, and did not really become friends until after high school.
That's true. It was 2007.
Yeah.
When I came in looking for a red wine that could be chilled, because I read Eric Asimov's column that you should chill red wines this summer.
Yeah.
So thank you, Eric Asimov. It was
I think it was the Klein Zin.
Yeah, do you remember which one?
Just the reg, the normale.
Yeah, the red label one.
Yeah.
It's like $8.
Yep.
How much is that wine now?
No idea. I haven't seen those wines in a long time. I'm sure they're everywhere, but
So how old were you when you were working at Merchants?
13.
Okay. And then what was the next job?
Next job, I worked there for like 7 years, and then I went across the street.
Was this just like a summer job, or?
No. It started as a summer job, and then I just kept on through high school and through college, part-time.
Okay. So you're stocking shelves and breaking down boxes.
Yeah, and also drinking a lot illegally and learning a lot about alcohol.
As you do in Grosse Pointe. So what was next?
Then I went across the street and worked for the competitor Woods Wholesale Wine. That's where we met.
That's where
Woods.
we met. Yeah.
Right.
Yes. I still go to Woods every single time I go back to Grosse Pointe to visit family.
Yeah. It's a mainstay,
Yeah, I mean, Woods is, to paint a picture, is sort of like the perfect shop for Grosse Pointe. It has all the under $20 bottles that you need, also beer and spirits, because we're in Michigan and you can have everything under the same roof.
Sure.
And like soda and really everything you need for your boat, or for going up north.
Yep. They got it all.
They got it all. And decent selection of Michigan wines there.
Yeah.
And if you know enough to ask, some behind the scenes classified Bordeaux.
Yeah, they got some of that. They got it all.
Yeah. And you were there for a few years also.
Yeah, I was there for a couple of years. And then I
And
went.
that's where when I met you there, I mean, you were above the age of 21 at that time, so you were really on the floor
Yeah,
selling.
for sure.
Okay.
And then
And you're in college still. You're at Wayne State. You're pursuing a degree in journalism.
yep,
You're doing a little bit of freelance writing, restaurant reviews, and things like that for like Detroit Metro Times.
yeah, the Metro Mix, which was
Metro
part of the
Mix.
Detroit Free Press.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Metro Mix. Yeah.
yeah. And then I just had done retail for a long time and didn't really see a big future in it, and went and worked up north in Charlevoix, Michigan, at a high-end wine shop slash restaurant called Esperance. Husband and wife team, Pram and Sue Asharia.
And
Uh,
Pram was kind of a big deal wine director in Detroit once upon a time.
yeah, he was at the Golden Mushroom and then Top of Wingo, which was in the Charlevoix, Traverse City area. I don't know exactly where it was.
Golden
Yeah,
Mushroom, to paint that picture, was sort of the place where the big spenders went to throw down on wine, including
yeah.
people like Robert Parker.
Bobby Parker, yeah.
When he would come through, I hear stories.
Oh yeah.
My friend Emily Ann was just asking, what are some good Michigan producers?
Well, I mean, Paul, you definitely are on the Michigan scene even more than me. So, but we love what? We love Left with Charlie. We love what Sean O'Keefe's doing at Mari. I mean, Grand Traverse is ubiquitous and it's a little more commercial, but I think the wines are really good.
Yeah, they are.
Um, I don't know what else. Any other cool producers? I mean, Bry's is really good.
Yeah, Black Star Farms.
Yeah,
I've always liked their stuff. Bowers
yeah.
Harbor.
Yeah, we stayed at Bry's this year and at Black Star Farms. I was blown away with the Black Star Farms eau de vie. Ooh, my boy Scott just joined. He used to work at Merchants with me back in the day.
Whoa.
Whoa, he's an OG.
Shout out
Yeah,
to Scott.
shout out.
What else do we have up in Michigan on those peninsulas? Maubie, of course. Maubie for
Yeah,
traditional
Malby.
method sparkling wine.
Yeah,
Um, Bowers Harbor is interesting. I mean, these guys are growers for the most part. I think they have some of the best vineyards there. And I believe it's Brian Albrook from Left with
yeah,
Charlie who's mostly making the wine for
yeah.
there. And then,
I'm waiting for like a hipster natty producer to come out and just like take it over.
well, I mean, the closest thing to that is Sean O'Keefe at Murray right now. I mean, his 20. Sean and I were supposed to have a session last week, but too many technical glitches, so we bailed. But his entire 2019 harvest was organic,
Yeah.
legit organic. Not easy to do in
I just
northwestern
mean,
Michigan.
who's gonna do pet nat, pig cat, hybrids?
It'll happen.
Of course it's gonna happen.
It'll happen.
Anyways,
Anyway, so back on target. So okay, so you did a winter season, like a ski season, essentially up with Pram.
yeah, 2009, the worst season they ever had. Great time to move up
Yeah,
to a seasonal job. But
and
it
then
taught me a lot. It really taught me a lot. They taught me a lot about food. They taught me a lot about restaurants. They taught me a ton about wine. It was a really good experience.
and then from there was to Plum Market, correct?
Yeah. So before I went to Esperance, I had passed the certified exam, and then went to Plum and was able to work with my buddy and mentor Mick Descamps. It was running what I, think was the best retail program I had ever seen. Because they were able to really run it almost like a high-end restaurant, which I didn't think was possible in the kind of retail that I grew up with, to have a diverse amount of high-end Austrian wine, German wine, grower champagne. Like they were somms that were on the pulse of what was going on, in the high-level somm scene. They taught me a lot.
And you're now Plum Market in West Bloomfield, correct?
Yep.
So we're talking affluent, suburbs of Oakland County in the Detroit area.
Yeah.
So definitely some money to be spent on wine
Yeah.
out there. And we shouldn't forget that's I think around that same time you oh no.
What's that?
Okay, we're back.
Hey,
Around
buddy.
that same time, I think you started staging or maybe working at Iron Chef Michael Simon's Roast in
Oh yeah.
downtown Detroit. You were selling
Yeah.
wine on the floor, right?
Yeah, I was working with Joseph Allerton, uh, and his team, and that was great. They invited me to come in and just kind of have fun on Friday night and just
And
serve the
again,
wine.
this is like 2009, 10-ish, right?
Yeah, probably 10, 11. Yeah.
This is definitely still before Detroit was the Detroit that people think of now. The Detroit that they read about, in all the cool publications now. 10 and 11, it was still relatively quiet
To the
downtown.
outsiders, but arguably I think it was cooler then. But
But it was quiet. I mean, Roast was kind of the only game in town.
totally, absolutely, Roast was one of the few places to go and drink good wine in the city for sure.
And that had like somebody wearing a suit that's going to come to your table and sell you wine.
Yeah, or beer. Their beer program was great.
Yeah. Okay, so you remained at Plum for a number of years, Plum Market, and we should talk about like what is Plum Market. So your Plum is sort of a chain throughout Michigan and now Illinois. Anywhere else?
No, they may be opening up in some other states, but for right now, just Michigan and Illinois.
And I would think that to make a comparison, we're at the level food wise of like Whole Foods, Wegmans,
Sure.
these types of places, except with a way more baller wine program.
Yeah, like a very, very high-end wine shop with sommeliers working the floor. Yeah.
And you were then tapped to open the first Chicago location as the wine director, correct?
Correct. So then we moved to. I went to France in there too. Remember, I went to Chateauneuf-du-Pape for a month and worked.
That's right.
Did a harvest and then moved to Chicago, and we spent like 8 months doing research and putting together that department, really building the department from square one, which is amazing, because if you've ever been a buyer, you know that the worst thing about it is you inherit somebody else's selection, right? And could take you years to work through what other people bought, which could be good and bad. But the beauty about Chicago was we started completely fresh. A very, very special opportunity to be able to do that.
And was there sort of any major difference between, at large, the wine culture, what people were buying between Plum Chicago and Plum Michigan?
Yeah, totally. I mean, things in Chicago, as you know, Paul, because you lived in Chicago, it's more neighborhood-like. People aren't going to drive, 20 minutes to go get something and really special. So in that neighborhood in Old Town, I would say, millennials, like white collar professional millennials mostly. But there's an older, definitely more on the European side of things. The big thing in any suburb, I would say, is California wine is king, and in the city, European wine is king. So we weren't used to selling that much interesting French and Italian wine or even Austrian wine coming from the suburbs, where it was mostly people had money, but it was more Cabernet based.
And there's a wine bar in the supermarket Plum in Chicago.
Yeah. It was only open for a couple of years, and it was mostly
okay.
directed for events. But yeah.
But you had like a hip little selection of off the beaten path stuff too. I mean, I remember you had New York stuff. You had probably Herman Weimer. I don't know if you had any Dr. Frank. You had
we did both. Yeah.
And then you had Canadian stuff too. You had Cape Spring at some point.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you ever carried the wines, but I remember you had a sample, and it was the first time I ever tasted the wines from Pearl Morissette in Ontario.
Oh yeah, we always had Pearl Morissette. Cabernet Franc was one of the best I've tasted. Oh, there's Mick, who used to work with at Plum.
I'm gonna wave to Mick. I don't know if that did anything. I hit the thing that said wave. Did it work?
I don't know.
There we go. I waved at Farmer Mick Som. Okay, so your path to buying wine was you started with the court fairly early, and you were the first person I ever met that I recall. You were the first person that had this, that was a certified sommelier. I didn't even know what that was until we started hanging out. Did you take that exam the first year they offered certified?
No, no, they
Because
offered
for a
it way.
while it was
I
intro
think
and advanced, and certified was added to the curriculum not crazy long ago.
so. I think I took that exam in 09, 08 or 09, and yeah, the certified had been around for a few years before that.
Okay. Did you take it the same time Brandon McCrill? What do you
I
guys
did. I took it with McCrill. Yeah.
Same test. So Brandon
Yeah.
McCrill, who worked around Chicago, Detroit, New York, claim to fame would be general manager and partner of Pearl and Ash and Rebel and the Walnut Street Cafe in Philadelphia. Brandon, who we grew up with in Grosse Pointe. So that's still relatively early on to have that certified
Yeah.
sommelier degree. What would you say that got you back then in comparison to how far the certified degree goes today?
I don't know. That's a good question. To be honest, I don't know if I knew what the opportunities were back then because I was mostly working in Detroit, where there were not a lot of sommelier gigs or a lot of restaurants that really had serious wine programs. Um, but I knew that I needed to do something to sort of like get out of the suburbs, you know? I knew that this was a step forward, and it was the only step forward that was available to me. And the people that were doing it were the kind of people that I admired and wanted to be working with. Sort of ambitious, forward-minded people.
I think you're sort of underselling it a little bit because by the time you got the Chicago gig at that location, I mean, you're buying everything from Yellowtail to DRC and Dom Perignon.
Sure.
And everything in between.
Sure.
That's a really, really desirable buying gig to nail with, basically just because of your experience. Would you say the certified degree even got your foot into that door, or was it
I
just
think it
more
did.
experience?
I think it definitely helps. I think that the retail side is very separate from the restaurant side. Some of the best retail buyers out there just have that innate sense of the deal. And they know the brands, they know the prices, they know their clients. And those are the people that I worked with from a very young age. And I think that's sort of like where my DNA starts, are from those merchants that just understand how to buy and sell. Now, I think
that's really fascinating. I want you to go a little bit granular on that because
I think and then like the Somm thing only hit that from a different angle, right? But I think the core of it is that element of retail, which is like you just know pricing inside and out. Like if somebody named a big brand, you would know what it needed to be priced at. You would know your clientele really inside and out. Yeah, it's different. And sometimes I even see restaurant people that don't understand that. When they're like, I don't understand why I can't get my clientele to drink Kerner. And I'm like, because it's Kerner. And I think that like that classic just sense of running retail in the suburbs teaches you sort of just like the black and white of your average American and what they want.
The poor Kerner grape. There's always that same one on every single restaurant list.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so how do you describe and sort of quantify, like if you had to teach someone to think like someone like Billy Matuk, the owner and buyer of Woods Wholesale, where you really kind of started selling wine?
Sure. How would I teach someone to?
Yeah, or how would you describe his process? What kind of a taster is he? Is he a good taster? Does that matter even?
I think he tastes for exactly almost what he wants, and he knows what people like, and he also understands that what he tastes doesn't matter. I think at the core of it, very successful people, unless you're working at a tasting menu restaurant where you can serve to people whatever you want, I think a lot of successful people understand that their palate is not that important. You have to have a good palate to buy correctly, but you have to also understand that it's not about you to sell things.
We should not forget that when you moved to Chicago, you began working Saturday nights on the floor at Everest also. Pretty much right away, almost, huh?
Yeah, I did Spiaggia at first.
Okay. So you're working like 5 days a week at in retail as the buyer and educator, doing events, and then you put a suit on and on Saturday night you go work the floor.
Yep.
Okay. So something that I remember vividly in one of our many conversations over the years, I don't remember when this was, but maybe I was like between jobs or unhappy at a job or just looking toward the next job or something like that. And I bet there was probably a degree of nervousness to my tone or something like that. And I remember one of the things that you said, and this relates to what I think we should really try to get at today, which is working. And I'll never forget what you said, which was because you used McDonald's as sort of a reference. And that's kind of what I remember. I remember like the branding of McDonald's. But basically your point was like, look, sometimes you're just going to have to work, whether you're working at McDonald's or anywhere else. And you kind of like brought it on yourself. You're like, look, I've always worked, no matter what. You were making a point that sometimes you don't get to choose where you work. And that kind of stuck with me to this day, because I think we're approaching a time when a lot of us are not going to really be able to choose where we're going to work.
Yeah. I don't remember saying that, but it does sound like something I would say. But the other thing that I think I always thought back in the day was, knowledge and experience is more valuable than money. And I think the same thing is true today. I think, it's common right now for a lot of us to be concerned about money, but the same things hold true where right now we should be really concerned about empowering ourselves with knowledge and experience. And in a way, I think it's more important than money if you can do it. Obviously, if you got to pay your bills, you got to pay your bills. But the people I think that are differentiating themselves with, their studies or their specialty, whether it's wine related or tech related or marketing related in the business, I think are the ones that are gonna do well in this. The ones that are doing it regardless of money because they are passionate about it.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I remember there was a Chicago jazz guitarist guy named Mike Alamana. When you're a young musician aspiring to be a professional working, jobbing musician, you're always concerned about money.
Right.
You're always concerned about working. And
Sure.
Mike, who is kind of, I mean, he's a brilliant jazz guitarist in Chicago. Go see him sometime if you can. Mike Alamana. I don't know where he plays now, but he said something was, he's like, I never thought about work or money. I just thought about playing.
Exactly. I think that that's the key, is think about what you love to do and think about like that core of what it is, the essence of what you do, whether it's a creative side or whatever, and just do it no matter what. And then the money will sort of come. I mean, that's always been true for me for over 20 years.
Now, that's all well and good for us, but I know that many of us are going to have to probably, by our definition, eat shit
Sure.
for a little while. And so I want to get back to that, just that working
Sure.
mentality
Well,
that
you can
you've
still
always
do it.
had.
You can still do that while you're eating shit, right?
I
You
mean,
may
we
have a
should
job.
start off by saying when you started at Plum Market, you were not the wine buyer. You were like, weren't you wearing like a white coat working behind the meat counter or something?
I was, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, you have been somebody that has always worked regardless of what your position was, which was something that
Yeah.
I admired about you and why I thought we could get to something today.
Yeah, I mean, I keep thinking I'm gonna name drop my boy Greg Spalding right now, who I love this guy. He kind of barely works in the wine business. He runs a music practice space. Um, but he is the most engaged person I know in terms of studies, reading books constantly and just informing himself and empowering himself. And he's become this like go-to person in the Chicago, even Midwest area for like one of the most influential kind of sommeliers I think around. And it's only because he's doing what he really wants and not looking at the return on investment. I think we can get really caught up in just looking at the ROI of every little situation. Should I study this? Should I study that? And I think you really got to go with what interests you and what makes you you. And eventually it'll work itself out. Even if you're in a job that doesn't relate to it, or let's say, let's say we had to work at Starbucks right now or McDonald's or whatever. Well, you can still go home at night and like read about stuff you're really passionate about. You can still like post things on social media. You can still write about things. You can still be proactively doing things that interest you that eventually will come to fruition. Right?
So I think that with all of our nervousness right now, we need to accept that to move beyond that, we need to just work, and you need to accept that you might not get the job that you want.
Correct.
Or the job that you had probably is not coming back.
Correct. And I think, I know it's hard to say, like as we just did, because it's hard, but money is not always the best indicator. And I think right now, as we are more sort of panicked than ever, we need to try not to think about money as the most important thing, right? I had to plug in my phone here.
So this kind of reminds me of, I think, something that's an interesting cultural difference that you might be able to riff on. And I'm going to go back to, again, I'm going to talk about music a little bit. I guess we should add that in a former life, I was a professional guitarist and played jazz and classical guitar for about 10 years before I ever even worked in a restaurant.
Right.
And we hung out in a jazz club or two in Detroit. Your mom was a famous jazz disc jockey for Detroit
Yeah,
Public Radio.
sure was.
Something that I find, I don't know how this is going to play out, in the future, but when I moved to New York, something that I realized was different about musicians in New York than musicians in Chicago or Detroit. I love my music education from Chicago because what it taught me was how to be a professional musician. You were taught in Chicago how to be a jobbing musician, which meant you were going to be an excellent sight reader. You're going to be fluent in multiple different styles of music so that the day the phone starts ringing for you to play some gigs, you can go and play in that wedding band. You can go and play in the pit orchestra that's backing up Stevie Wonder at the United Center. You can go and play, a jazz club with your creative friends. And you should probably also be teaching several days a week of, middle school aged students or
Yeah,
younger.
that's what gives
And
you
that, that
well-rounded experience.
that's what they taught you to be in Chicago. It was like they taught you to work. And when I moved to New York, nobody really did that. It just wasn't a thing. Musicians were not like at home trying to book their wedding band for the future. They
Well, was it
were
because, do you think it's because when people move to New York, they're trying to like make it big
partly that, and
and
it's
they
partly
think they're
just the
special?
competitive. Well, and the oversaturation of musicians and the competitiveness of it, and the sort of like there's just a different water in New York that you drink, and it just sort of sparks your creative drive, and that sort of takes over from your I need to get 30 students a week and I need to play at two different restaurants a week and I need to book a jobbing band on the weekends, which
But
is
the irony is it's more expensive and more competitive in New York, so you
well,
really
so
need to
what
be like that.
so
Yeah,
what happens is it ends up sucking a lot of energy out of you to like be a working musician, to teach all those lessons, to make sure you're,
right.
answering your phone when that jobbing band leader called, because if you don't, they're just going to cross your name off the list and go to the next guy. And in New
Because it's
York,
just harder to live in New York.
well, in New York, the musicians, rather than try to job, they got survival jobs, Starbucks, Trader Joe's,
Yep.
so that when they got out of there, they weren't like drained of their creative energy from trying to like write charts for their wedding band. So when they left their survival job, they still had like a desire and an energy to go and be creative.
Right.
And that's what I think you're kind of getting at with your boy who runs the rehearsal space. It's like you have your day gig and then your som gig, your creative som gig that we love, that those wine bar jobs, those floor sommelier jobs that may not be around in the
He's
future.
part-time. He's a part-time retailer too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we may really have to start thinking in a real way about survival jobs to
Yeah.
then be able to do our wine jobs that we sort of love,
Yeah,
on our own time.
I think you can do either, depending on you. But I think at the end of the day, don't lose. It's important to not lose who you are and what really inspires you creatively, right? Because if you keep stoking that fire, like let's say you're super into the wines from the Jura or Chianti or wherever, if you really stay on it and you keep studying and you keep networking with those producers and you keep posting those things on social media and you keep that sort of alive as much as you can, even if you're working a job that's not related to it, eventually it's going to pay off, I think. Eventually, people will look to you and remember all the things that you did to differentiate yourself. And not because you, saw this return on investment immediately. No, because I think in our industry being a little bit more creative driven, you have to just kind of go towards those things that really inspire you, no matter what. Because even if they don't pay in 20 years, you still got something out of it for yourself.
So the bottom line is that we have to work.
Yeah, I think so.
We have to work. And I think what might be a struggle for some is that we are not going to have the choices that we once had, and especially for some of the younger wine professionals. I mean, when I think it's this is a whole another topic that we could discuss another time. But I mean, when I started doing this in New York City, I mean, there really weren't floor sommelier positions.
Right.
There were anybody who was affiliated with the title sommelier was usually either also the general manager, or like some other manager in charge of something else, service director, or um, you know, director of operations, whatever it
Sure.
was. You wore many hats, and you were not in the tip pool, and you worked those famous crazy restaurant hours. You opened, you closed. The people that came up in this industry sort of after that, the last thing I want to say is that they don't want to work hard, or that they don't are not talented. They are all those things in spades, but they had more choices. They had choices that we didn't exactly have circa 2010, 2011. And I'm a little bit concerned that some of those people are not going to quite know how to navigate the waters
Sure.
that are going to appear in whatever the new normal in the restaurant or sommelier
Yeah, I
game
think
ends up being.
I think right now it's really important to stay proactive and stay engaged and stay positive, right? Because if you're just at home watching Netflix and waiting for your restaurant to reopen, I mean, that's not a good game plan, you know?
So what are some things that you think people could be doing right now? Because I really, other than strategic planning, I think it's going to be inevitable that a lot of people who had sommelier positions, whether they were managers also or even just working the floor, they might have to wait tables, whatever that's
Yeah.
going to mean, or pick up that extra shift here and there at a wine shop. They might they're I think we really need to accept that the new reality is probably your job is not going to be to literally come in at 4 o'clock, clock in, do a little bit of cellar work, do the service. Once your last dessert pairing is poured, clock out, and you're having a shift drink with your buddies at 11:30 p.m. That's
Well, I
probably
think,
not going to happen.
staying connected with your social circle, I think is really important. And I'm doing that by studying a lot with people over the phone. Um, and I'm not even, to be honest with you, I'm not even studying for the information. I'm more studying just to stay connected and keep a routine with people. Because it's like, okay, you wake up in the morning and you study. Okay, you wake up in the morning, you talk to this person. And I really like that. I also think, reading as much as possible, whether it's newspaper about current events or also the industry. I think now is actually a really fascinating time to be reading about what's going on in our industry, right? What's going on with restaurant relief packages, what's selling in retail, what restaurants are reopening, what are the successful people doing, and what can we learn from them, right? And obviously things are going online. Okay, well, what does that mean? Like, how can I increase my web presence? How can I increase my web skills, so that when a job does open up, that I can speak about the current landscape and I can speak about how I think it will evolve forward instead of just being reactive and saying, well, I don't know. I used to have a floor job and that's what I can do. No, not that. I think you should almost interview yourself. Like, what would I say to myself in 5 years? What would I say to myself if I were an employer? And I wouldn't just say, well, I used to do this job and I need to make this amount of money. No, you wouldn't say that to yourself. You would say, this is what I can offer you. This is the value I can add. And I think you have to ask what value you can be in this current landscape.
Keeping your ear to the pulse.